Welcome to session 3. Glad to be back and begin looking at two twin concepts, the twin concepts of permission on one hand and confidentiality on the other. And really, if we tried to look at that concept, how many of you have heard this illustration before, a three-legged stool illustration? You know that what happens if you cut off one leg of a three-legged stool? You're going to do what? You're going to fall down, right? And so we've begun building the blocks toward great community chaplain service, and one of those building blocks is the establishment of relationships. So if you're thinking of it in terms of a three-legged stool, you would be thinking in terms of building relationship being that one leg of the stool, and then the other two legs, permission and confidentiality, that really are going to form the foundation on which we're going to lay all of the balance of the training. And we're going to lay the balance of the training upon those concepts so that we can live out that mission statement, that mission of building relationships with the hope of gaining permission to share the life-changing good news of Jesus Christ and do it in a non-threatening manner. And so as we get into session 3 today, I want you to turn to page 32 in your books, and we will begin laying out and expanding on those concepts of permission and confidentiality. As you look at the mission statement on page 32 in your workbooks, I want you to circle that word. Our mission is to build caring relationships with the hope of gaining, circle the word, permission to share the life-changing good news of Jesus Christ in a non-threatening manner. Now, you may be working through this study as part of a small group, and I would encourage you at this point in time to hit the pause button and think about the question that you find, and it's the question you find in each of the 12 sessions that we will look at together. And that's the question, how have you lived out the mission in your community since our last session? And I would encourage you to generate some conversation in your group about that, because you will gain encouragement from what other people are doing and how God is using other people out in the community, and you will gain confidence and ideas on how you can reach out as well. Now remember, when we look at that question, the goal and desire is not to raise our anxiety level or to force us to perform. One of the questions that we got challenged on early relative to this question was somebody who was a self-confessed Type A personality. Now, you may be watching the video, or you may be with us today, and you may be just like me, and you would raise your hand and say, "Yep, that's me, self-confessed Type A. I want to do that. If there's a race to run, I want to run it. If there's a basketball game, and you happen to be somebody other than a Tar Heel fan, I'm going to want to bet you about that basketball game." So that Type A personality that exists, that really wants to compete and achieve, if that's you, this question may create challenges for you, because you may want to look at that question and say, the challenge to me is to perform. And I want you to take a big, deep breath and say, no, absolutely not. It's to really step back and recognize we're not trying to force performance here. We're not trying to raise that anxiety level or raise that competitive streak or that Type A mentality. What we're really trying to do is get us thinking about how we can live out our faith in the community, how we can live out that mission, and more importantly, how God can manifest Himself in and through our lives as we live out the mission in our community. Because go back to one of those foundational verses that we talked about in the first 2 sessions, and this is by way of review. When we think about John 15:5, where does that put the burden? John 15:5 points us back to that abiding relationship, that us in Christ, Christ in us, that apart from Him we can bear what? Nothing. And with Him we can produce much fruit. And so when you think about that question, think about it in terms of not trying to perform, but in terms of allowing God to do in you and through you what He's equipping you to do. Now, as we look back by way of review, page 32, page 33, we covered a ministry formula last week: time plus talk plus transparency plus trials equals trust. And today we're going to flesh out that ministry formula, and we're going to focus on those two concepts of permission and confidentiality. On page 33 in your guide, you will see the bridge. Take a look at that with me. The bridge today that we will be focusing on is the value of gaining permission of people for ministry and service, and the importance of maintaining confidentiality in order to build bridges into the lives of those to whom we minister. And when we think about that bridge, we're thinking about gaining permission we're thinking about maintaining confidentiality, and it all goes back to that ministry formula. Because two of the things that will contribute the most to gaining people's trust is placing them in the driver's seat of the relationship. That's what permission is all about. And then maintaining the confidentiality of items and secrets and things that they share with you. You know that most people in the society that we live in today, most people, if you were to engage them into an intense conversation, they would admit they don't have a single person in their life that they can share absolutely everything with. And what we want to be as community chaplains, what we want to think about is being that person that someone can come to and they can share absolutely anything with us and it stays with us. And so that in itself will open up doors and opportunities for ministry. On page 33 in your workbook, you will find a key statistic. And it's a fascinating statistic that I think many of us, if we could take a show of hands, or if I could look into the video camera and see the hands raised coming back at me and ask this question: how many of you feel like someone in your lifetime has overstepped boundaries with you regarding a conversation about faith matters? 88% in a recent survey from AARP magazine indicated that someone had overstepped the boundaries in a faith conversation with them. And I frankly, when I saw the number 88%, I thought it was low. Usually it's 100%. I have rarely met someone that hasn't said they encountered someone who overstepped the boundaries in a conversation about faith matters. And what we want to do is we want to avoid being another piece of that 88%. We want to build relationships in a way that gain us that permission to do what? To share the life-changing good news of Jesus Christ and do it in a non-threatening manner. And so page 33, we'll begin to expound on that and lay that out. And begin to understand that effective community chaplaincy, effective service, effective ministry in your community, it's going to begin with understanding this concept of permission. Now, one question that we'll want to ask, we'll want to ask several questions, but we want to talk about the who, we're going to talk about the when, and we're going to talk about the why of permission as we begin to look at that concept. But we're going to focus on that gaining permission and recognize that it avoids the end of that mission statement trap of doing things in a threatening manner. Remember our mission statement? We want to be what? Non-threatening. And so non-threatening means, we talked about this in the first two sessions, they don't run from us when they see us coming. And so we're doing things, we're working in their lives by permission. The word permission, let me give you kind of a quick concept. It's the ability to establish boundaries. It's the ability to be able to hear and say the word no. It's the ability to know that other people have boundaries. They're placing them in their lives, and to cross over those boundaries requires that we gain permission. So, page 34, the big question: who grants permission to the chaplain, or to you in your neighborhood, or to you in your workplace as you're trying to serve and care for people? Real easy answer to that question. The person you are serving is the person that grants permission. And permission can only be granted by that person that you are serving. Permission is needed before you cross the boundary of each and every person in your community. Because we live in a world, we live in a society that is very, here's a word, multicultural. What does that mean? You hear that word. How many of you, if again, look through the camera, and if I could see the hands raised, how many of you have heard that word multicultural? And we sometimes hear the word used. We hear it in news reports. We hear it on television. And we may sometimes wonder, what is that word all about? What does it mean? It just means that people are from a lot of different cultures. And what that means is that people don't always think like we think. They don't believe what we believe. They may not look like we look. They may not have grown up where we grew up, and so we live in different cultures with people of different belief systems, and we want to gain their permission by placing them again in that driver's seat and letting them be the person that grants us permission. Statistically, 70% of people don't have a church that they would call home. And so with 70% of people having no church that they would call home, we can recognize very quickly with that statistic that people are going to be coming at life with a lot of different viewpoints. Now, some of you may challenge that statistic. That's okay. In different parts of the country, it'll be higher, and in some parts of the country, it'll be lower. But here's the case I would make for it. If you have a meeting at your church this particular week, and it's Monday through Friday, does it take you longer to get to that meeting than it would on Sunday morning? Generally, that's the case. The church where I happen to be involved and where I have to attend, if I have to come to a meeting at that church, it's a normal Sunday morning 15-minute drive for me. If I have a meeting at 8 o'clock, that same 15-minute drive, I better leave at 7:15. It turns it into a 45-minute drive. Why? Because more people are on the roads. Because 70% of people aren't where? They're not in church on Sunday morning. And so we make that case, and what we're doing is we're recognizing people are coming at life from a variety of different perspectives. And so who grants permission? It's the people that we're serving and the people that we want to care for. When? Page 34, when should we seek permission? Are you ready? Always. All right? If you're in this room, repeat that after me. Always. If you're watching on video, when should we seek permission? The word is always. We seek permission at every moment of ministry opportunity. Permission should be sought in times of crisis. Permission should be taught when you arrive into a situation. Permission should be sought when you arrive at the emergency room. All kind of different cases in all kind of different situations. We want to always be seeking permission. We're going to role play some circumstances as we go, and we're going to look at how do you do that? What are the words that you use to seek permission, and how do you go about doing that? Page 35, why? Why bother seeking permission? How many of you are like me and you grew up watching a couple of John Wayne movies? You know, and the Duke knew how to go into a room and take control, didn't he? And he could just go in and charge into a situation and just seize that situation by the throat and attack it. And that's not what we want to do as community chaplains. You see, we're not charging in with a John Wayne approach toward evangelism. We're not charging in with a John Wayne kind of approach toward caring for people. We're wanting to go in with a more gentler approach, a permission-based approach where we're putting the person in control, and we're very much valuing that non-threatening part of our mission statement. Page 36, I want to give you a key verse. And if this is a verse that you're really coming across for the first time, I would encourage you to tuck this verse into your memory bank. It is one of those key verses to really kind of hang our hats on as community chaplains as we try to seek and serve and care for those in our community. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 15 through 16. Now think about the context of this for just a minute. If you've walked with the Lord for some period of time, most of us would recognize that Peter, he was that type A guy I was talking about just a few minutes ago, wasn't he? Peter was kind of like John Wayne before John Wayne was John Wayne, wasn't he? You know, Peter could walk into a situation and he would seize it. Who was the person that leaped out of the boat to go walking on the water toward Jesus? It was Peter. And so Peter was the guy he was aggressive. He was assertive in his personality. I'm going to be the last guy in the world that's going to say today about Peter, he was a guy that would stick his foot in his mouth. You know why? Because I like Peter. You know why? Because sometimes I'm like Peter. And so I can tend to make those same mistakes that Peter would make, and I can't wait to meet him one day. And sometimes I get fearful about talking about some of our great people in the Bible because I think sometimes we forget that we're going to meet them someday. And we're going to get to spend eternity with him. And I can't wait to meet Peter and really ask him what was going in your brain when you wrote these verses. Because Peter was a guy that he would be fairly bold in what he would say. And he was fairly bold in what he believed. When Jesus asked that question, who am I? Peter was the first one to speak up and said, you're the Christ. He was the one with the answer. But listen to what Peter says to us. The guy that can be aggressive in his faith says to us instead, you must worship Christ as Lord of your life. And if someone asks you, circle that word ask about your Christian hope, always be ready to explain it. But listen to this. Do this in a gentle and respectful way. You know who I think Peter was talking to? I think he was talking to himself. I think he was reminding himself, he was reminding some of the earlier followers of Christ to, hey, listen, Put Jesus Christ as Lord. That means He's the owner. He's in control. He's calling the shots. Make Him Lord of your life. And as you're living that life out as a follower, with Jesus as the Lord, watch for people to ask you about the difference that Christ makes in your life. And if someone asks you about your Christian hope, listen to those words, always be ready to explain it, but do this in a gentle and respectful way. I had a friend of mine just this past week sharing a story. We were in a large group, and he was relaying this story. His two sons are active in motocross sports, and they're young kids. They're 8, 9, 10-year-old kids, and they're racing motorcycles, and they're learning to race motorcycles. And if you've ever been to a motorcycle track, you know that attracts a fairly aggressive kind of personality because it is motorcycle racing. And so they're at the motorcycle track, and his boys they're racing the bikes, and they're going around. And my friend and his wife, they're there at the motocross track, and they're getting to know people and meeting people. And my buddy and his wife, they don't exactly look like the rest of the folks there. You know, back to that concept I was talking about, multicultural, right? And my friend, he doesn't have a tattoo on his arm. He doesn't have an earring in his ear. In fact, if he were here, he would self-describe himself as kind of a guy out of a GQ magazine. And he's that, but he's at the motocross track, and he's in a conversation with a guy who has many tattoos and who has many piercings and who doesn't exactly look like him. But this guy asked a question. It was a very interesting question. He said to my buddy and his wife, "You two seem like you have the secret of life. What's the secret of life?" You realize what a wide open door of opportunity that is? That's 1 Peter 3:15. That's my buddy living out under the lordship of Christ, not as a guy off of a GQ magazine, but as a guy whose life looked differently enough there in that context for somebody to ask about the hope that existed within him. You know what, my buddy? He was excited because he got to share, guess what, the life-changing good news of Jesus Christ, and he did it by invitation. He did it by permission because this guy was asking about his Christian hope. He was ready to explain it, and he did it in a gentle and respectful way. And so we want to be living out our faith. We want to be living out our lives in a way that invites people and attracts people to want to ask about the faith that we would possess. And we want to be able to gain that permission to do it in a gentle and respectful way. One more verse, page 36, Proverbs 16, verse 7. Because we look at the very end of our New Testament Scriptures, and if we go back to our Old Testament Scriptures in the book of Proverbs, we find another verse that kind of informs the same concept. Proverbs 16 tells us that when people's lives please the Lord, even their enemies are at peace with them. Now, let me say something about that word enemies. This verse is not meant to imply that as community chaplains, the people that don't think like we think or believe like we believe are our enemies. But guess what? Sometimes they will see you as the enemy. Why? Because you don't believe what they believe. You don't think like they think. You're not living like they live, and that in itself can be a threat to them. And so they can put their arm up and keep you at a distance. But if our lives are pleasing to the Lord, we're living a life that's pleasing to the Lord, the Scripture says that God will honor that, and that even those people who would see themselves as our enemies, we'll be able to live at peace with them. We'll be able to walk into a great relationship with them, and we'll be able to serve and care for them. I had this illustrated for me just a while back. I had a guy, and he asked me to pray for his girlfriend's mother. Wanted me to pray for her, and so I agreed to do so. And fast forward in the story by a few weeks, he calls me up. I'm on vacation. I'm not even in town, and he says, "Hey, I asked you to pray. Situation's kind of turned worse. It looks like she may not end up making it through this cancer. Would you go by and see her?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd be glad to go by and see her. I'm out of town. Can I send another chaplain? We have a chaplain close by in the area. Would it be okay if I send another chaplain to care for your girlfriend's mom?" And he said, "Yeah, that'd be good." He said, "But would you go see her when you get back?" Here's the power of relationship, gang. You see, it's not about what I was doing. It's not about who I am. It was about the investment of relationship time there. And the words he said to me was, "I don't know that guy. I know you." And then the second thing he said was this. He said, you don't judge us, old sinners, like other people do. That's powerful. And what that was in my mind, the verse I went to mentally was this verse, that when people's lives please the Lord, He'll make even their enemies live at peace. And so this was a guy, he didn't experience judgment. He didn't feel judgment. He experienced care. He experienced compassion. And when the time came, when the need came, the door opened very wide to be able to discuss matters of faith. I can't tell you the number of conversations that I've had with this guy over faith matters. Multiple times we've discussed a relationship with God. I wished I could tell you today that he had come to faith in Christ. He's not. But you know what I'm confident of? I'm confident that he's multiple steps closer than he was. I really am. And I really see God working in his life and God drawing him in, drawing him to a relationship. And so we're wanting to kind of put these scriptures in practice and live out a relationship that gains permission, that draws in and that attracts. And so now how? We've talked about, through these pages, we've talked about the who, we've talked about the when, and we've talked about the why. But what we want to be is tremendously practical and talk about how. And so I want to role play some verses and some words, some phrases for you to tuck into your ministry toolbox so that when you're walking into ministry situations, you're able to unpack permission and it will come in real natural fashion. Here's something I would encourage you to remember. Page 36, we actually point this out in this how-to section. Remember that ministry is a marathon, it's not a sprint. Let that grasp. Let that sink in. Ministry is a marathon, it's not a sprint. Now, many of you in this room or are watching by videotape, perhaps you've never run a marathon. I will tell you, I like marathons. I'm a lousy sprinter. All right? A sprint is over in about 10 seconds. A marathon takes 3 or 4 hours. In other words, it takes time. And what we want to encourage you to think about is that the ministry of permission and the ministry of service, it's a ministry that takes time. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so think about it in that context, that what you're doing is you're moving a step at a time in that marathon. All right? You're moving a step at a time in ministry with people and in their lives. And so take a look at some suggested phrases as you're beginning to care and serve. Here's a phrase. Would it be okay with you if I? You say, okay, use that in context. Somebody shares with you that they're going to have surgery. They have to have their tonsils taken out. How many of you think that tonsillectomy is a minor surgery? In this room, raise your hand. How many of you think tonsillectomy is a minor surgery? And let me define a minor surgery for you. A minor surgery is one that they're going to do on someone else. All right? So if you're facing a tonsillectomy, it's a major surgery. All right? And so a minor surgery is always that surgery that they're doing on someone else. All right? But think about that. Simple tonsillectomy, right? That is one that I was really kind of setting you up. That is one that we see as a minor surgery, right? We think we're going to go in and out, outpatient surgery, be done. But you know what? They can do just about everything. They can give you a heart transplant and outpatient surgery just about. But we